Essendon in 2000 were just an amazing team, and they're an absolute powerhouse. They were the best I've seen. I can't remember a stronger team on and off the field than them in 2000. So where has it gone wrong for Essendon? They went from fielding arguably the best team of all time to not having won a final since 2004. Given the size of the club, they should be doing better. Alone on premierships, they and Carlton rank as the two greatest clubs, with 16 each. Essendon always manages to pull crowds too, grabbing over 84,000 members in 2019. Knowing the chaos around the club, that figure itself is staggering. But why can't they turn their pedigree into more success? Let's find out.
Delivered right down the throat of Merv Neagle. Lead in pursuit. Neagle gets his kick in long and high to the goal square, and look at that.
Their success in the modern era has to begin with the appointment of legendary Kevin Sheedy in 1981. Make no mistake that he is one of the best coaches to ever coach in the VFL and AFL history. Essendon won 4 flags in his tenure at the club, cementing his legacy.
It speaks volumes for the ability of all and sundry, right from the administration through to coach Kevin Sheedy and the players out there on the ground. As
great as they were in the 80s and 90s, every footy fan can agree that the 2000 side was something else, as Bruce told us earlier. That team went 21-1 for the season, only losing a shock match to the Doggies, who employed the Super Flood. But other than that, Essendon were perfect.
This is the best season we've ever seen. Kevin Sheedy joins Dick Reynolds.
In nothing surprising, they easily thrashed Melbourne in the grand final for their 16th flag, and 4th under Sheedy. We were looking at more projected success for this club going forward. No club had steamrolled the competition like they did in 2000. They looked set for a dynasty of success, but that idea didn't last long, as 2001 didn't pan out the way many expected.
For the first 2 centre bounces, there he goes.
Gets it again, goes to Lloyd, might find him here. Gasper, Rioli, Lloyd's kicked it, he's got 97.
In 2001, it was almost more of the same for Essendon. Granted, they weren't nearly the force they were the year before. They were still the minor premiers, but something didn't feel right, as the surging Brisbane Lions were hot on their backside all year.
Barnes and McDonald out of the air. Still McDonald to Voss in the pocket. Voss close, he's done it. Has he? The captain, he's finished it off.
It wasn't to be for what was once the best side ever, as they got hounded in the 2001 grand final. It was a swift end to the Bombers' success, as things got worse from there.
In the end, Cousins couldn't control it. Judd through the traffic. Well done, Jacobs. Number 3 for Barnard.
Essendon tried their hearts out over the next 3 seasons, hoping for one last ride to a flag, a 5th under Sheedy. They couldn't get it done, only going as far as the semi-final each time. Granted, their last finals win was a doozy and memorable fixture. The Bombers somehow pushed to a massive lead at half-time, but Melbourne came back strong in the 3rd term, setting up a nervy finish.
45, oh, don't tell me! He's kicked up beauty!
Somehow, some way, Essendon got over the line in what has since been their last finals win for the past decade and a half. It was clear for all to see that this team was on its last legs, barely able to keep itself afloat. And indeed, they couldn't keep themselves afloat. Essendon ended up finishing 13th, 15th and 12th in the following 3 seasons, signalling to everyone that their time was up, that a new era was imminent.
What a fitting way to go out. He went out on top of his game.
Just like that, the end of an era. Bird and Sheedy both announced their departures at the end of the season, with the club coming to grips with its need to start again. Matthew Knights was elevated to the role of senior coach, with the hopes of thousands of fans resting on his shoulders, in the hopes of taking them back to the promised land. Knights' first season wasn't particularly enjoyable, with more mediocrity at the club. It was fair to see it coming, given the new look to the side. Paddy Ryder, Joe Watson were among the wealth of young stars that were looking to shape the future, as other veterans around them were slowly on the way out. 2009 was a much better season, with Knights steering the club back into the finals. Things were finally back on the rise for Essendon, with their rebuilding project seemingly going well. However, in the final game against the reigning premiers in Hawthorn, Matty Lloyd decided to send Brad Sewell into the abyss, starting a major brawl, and that saw the end to his career.
Here we go. They are going to be angry, the Hawks. It is angry. Hodge and Lloyd, Osborne coming over the top. And I tell you what, Matty Lloyd, you're the target. 3 in a row.
So Essendon through to the finals. Michael Hurley, 4 goals, was one of the stars for the Bombers. And the reigning premiers will not take part in the September action.
They finally made it to September, but in the end it meant nothing, as they got smacked by Adelaide by nearly 100 points. No doubt the previous week's antics played a part in their demise, as Lloyd himself eventually decided to call time on his career. Suddenly, what looked like progress for the club then turned into turmoil. Turmoil followed them the next year, as Essendon stumbled out of the block and didn't bring themselves to the finals and follow up from their positive 2009 season. Knights was backed all season to carry on the job, but was then sacked no less than a day after their final game against the Bulldogs. The Knights project was over. It's easy to talk in hindsight, but you can see why the Knights era was a failure for Essendon. To replace Kevin Sheedy is an impossible job for any coach, much less of a coach like Knights who didn't have the experience to take on such a task. Sheedy was the club during his time, so for Knights to come in with his own methodology was like trying to undo everything that Essendon had built for 3 decades. It's nothing against Knights per se, but it's just the cruel nature of sports. Knights' youth also did play a factor in his failure at Essendon. Though a good footballer and a reliable assistant coach, he was only 37 when he took over from Sheedy, far too young to take on the role. A lot of the leaders just didn't want to hear it from him. In fact, earlier this year, Matthew Lloyd expressed how much he hated his time being coached by Knights. He said, to quote, "I hated turning up to the football club in those last 2 years," and that Matthew wanted to create his own path to Kevin Sheedy. From the horse's mouth himself, you can see that a lot of the Knights' decisions left bitterness among the senior players. Lloyd was also captain during this time, so it only spells danger when a captain and coach cannot see eye to eye on matters.
Yeah, Matthew's spoken of his formula to win a premiership, and I'd have to say they won't win a premiership playing the style of football they have. It's great, the attack and moving forward, but they're leaking too many goals, and it's happened over the last couple of years.
Knights just wasn't the right fit for the club. They needed a coach with experience to be able to handle the major rebuilding job, one who could nurture the young stars and be able to command the respect of the veterans. This chaos is why he ended up leaving the club in tumultuous circumstances. In a move that came from nowhere, James Hird was announced the new coach of the Bombers. In another shock, Mark Thompson was his assistant, not long after turning Geelong into one of the best teams of all time. The two were brought in the hopes of returning the club to its former glory. It made sense at the time. 2 former legends of the club who have won flags, now given the job of returning the club back to where it belongs. Anyone with half a brain knew that Bomber Thompson himself was the man pulling the strings in the coach's box, but having Hird as the face was sentimental due to his status as a legend of Essendon. Their first season at the club was a mixed bag, as Hird and Bomber acclimatised themselves at the new setup. 8th on the ladder was a good start, perhaps a sign for things to come, as they immediately returned to the finals. It was easy to think that Essendon were onto something, but similarly to 2009, Essendon were passengers in the first final, this time getting dumped out by Carlton no less. The progress was there, but routinely getting smashed in the opening week of the finals was a trend that Essendon did not want to eventuate. Action was needed in order to drive the club. In 2012, Essendon looked like they'd taken the next leap, being well within the top 8 for the first half of the year. Finally, the club looked like it was taking the next leap into the promised land that the fans and the club had been waiting for. Perhaps the Hird and Bomber experiment was a risk worth taking after all. Unfortunately, their second half was dismal, with loss after loss capping off their season, as they went from finals mix to a droopy 11th by the end of the season. It was almost a carbon copy of the Knights era. Make the finals, get smashed, and then out the next year. something wasn't right at Essendon. What wasn't right at Essendon turned out to be the biggest scandal in football history. With Bomber Thompson came Dean Robinson and Stephen Dank, the high-performance coach and sports scientist, tasked with bringing back the best out of the players. They engaged in a supplements program. We know how long and annoying this saga was, so there was no need for the gritty details of it. At the end of 2013, despite finishing in the top 8, Essendon were banned from playing in the finals that year, meaning that their spot ended up going to Carlton, once again their foes finding a way to spite them. To really run this home, Herb was then banned from all footballing activity for a year, so Thompson was given the job of caretaker coach for all of 2014. Essendon were beginning to unravel. If you could name a better candidate for caretaker coach than Mark Thompson, we'd call you a liar. For a coach with his credentials to miraculously take the reins of Essendon was a blessing, as throughout the Asada drama, Essendon finished 7th, in what was their best season in a decade. Finally, they were well placed to actually win a final, coming up against North Melbourne, where they ran out to a massive lead at half-time. It all came crashing down though, as North led a big comeback to steal a victory in the final minutes. It was a progressive season for Essendon, but that loss still left a bitter taste. But their biggest error was allowing Hurd to resume his coaching duties. They were gifted Mark Thompson on a silver platter, who guided them to their best season in a decade, despite the turmoil all around them. Rather than just let him take over, they allowed Hurd to come back in spite of the negativity around his presence. It was a case of the club shooting itself in the foot. And what a shot it was, as Essendon stumbled to an atrocious 15th on the ladder in 2015. The investigations heated up as the AFL Tribunal found 34 players implicated in the program not guilty, which opened up a wider investigation. This left a dark cloud over the club all year, where they were shambolic. Herb resigned at the end of the year, and everything was in question. Judgment Day came in January 2016, where the CAS handed down their verdict. The 34 implicated players were banned from football for a year, including several still on Essendon's list, as well as several others around the AFL. Essendon had to get top-up players to be able to field a team in 2016, filled with a mix of young players and ragtag veterans. It was a sorry mob, to say the least, though they cannot be blamed. John Worsfold was also brought back into the club, hoping to bring some stability to the chaotic mess. It was the worst season in the club's history. You can almost say this saga destroyed the club, caused it to implode. Essendon are one of the most prestigious and historical clubs in the game, so to see them go through such calamity of events was immense. No question, it was the biggest scandal in Australian sports. The millions of dollars in fines, the loss of memberships and ticketing revenue would have had a major knock-on effect on the club's finances for years to come. Couple that with the sackings, bans, legal battles and cases of mistrust and detest added to their woes. The saga still lingers around the club like a bad smell and probably will never go away. The first year back from the supplements punishments was a moderate success, as a passable season when you factor in what they went through. A respectable 7th was a sign that they weren't ready to win finals just yet, and that was exemplified by the hiding at the hands of the Sydney Swans in elimination final. It still felt like a repeat cycle. Go through a crisis, survive, scrape into the finals, get smashed at the start, rinse and repeat. This time, they need to really show progress now that everything was supposed to be behind them. And the cycle did repeat itself. Despite the big signings of Jake Stringer and Adam Sard, with their young talents further emerging in the AFL, Essendon once again trudged through the season and finished a paltry 11th on the ladder. Another backward step for a club looking to finally break that duck. They went to a 5-6 start in 2019. It was becoming more of the same for Essendon. After the bye, Essendon went on a massive run and scraped in at 8th on the ladder. At this point, Essendon just made up numbers whenever they made the 8. no one was taking them seriously any longer. The off-season was even better than previous years in the context of drama. Danaher made it known he wanted to go to Sydney, even though he'd hardly played since 2017. Essendon stood firm. John Worsfold also announced that he'll be leaving after 2020, with him handing over the duties to Ben Rutten. In a bizarre twist, Rutten was to become a co-coach of sorts for 2020, gradually assuming more responsibility as he transitions to the full-time role. It's tough to answer why they haven't won a final in so long, but there are a few plausible responses that all stem from win-at-all-costs mentality that have seeped into the club. Nothing exemplifies this mentality more than the supplement saga. Essendon took a big risk to return to their glory years, and it nearly crippled the club, with the effects still felt to this day. That could be the first answer. The next answer could be their list strategy. Rather than just letting their veterans age out, going into the draft and rebuilding from the ground up, Essendon tried to chuck band-aids onto their problems and look for immediate fixes for their long-term problems, in a desperate bid to bring back success. Instead of starting fresh and building on a solid foundation, the club have rushed their rebuild, leaving them in a state of limbo. Not bad enough to bottom out, but not good enough to actually win anything. Take the Lions for example, who've rebuilt their club organically and are now on the brink of something special. Essendon need to adopt this strategy if they want to make any serious noise. Essendon need to take a hard look at themselves and the problems that they've put upon themselves. They haven't won a final because they've rushed the process and not built anything solid as the foundation to their club. They need to adopt this new approach if they have any hope of bringing back the good times. Thanks for watching today's video. This first appeared as an article on sportinghq.com.au, and the link will be in the description. Remember to like and subscribe, and to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, sportinghq.com.au.
Sporting HQ.